Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Antapasis with the City of Tampa Office of Emergency Management. We want to remind everyone that hurricane season has already started beginning this June 1st. And although 2020 has brought about tons of different issues to our city, we wanted to emphasize and take a moment today about hurricane preparedness like we do every single year as Tampanians. So what better way to prepare than get an idea of what we can expect this season? So with us today, we have Brian LaMarre, who is the meteorologist in charge with the National Weather Service Tampa Bay area office over in Ruskin. His office operates 24/7 and provides weather forecasts and warning services for all of West Central and Southwest Florida, comprising 15 counties, including the city of Tampa. Brian has been a meteorologist with the National Weather Service for 25 years and has also worked in offices in Texas, Maryland, Connecticut. And we are honored to have him with us today. And honestly, Brian, just thank you for taking the time. And we wanted to, get everybody prepared for hurricane season with everything else that's been going on in 2020. And we had some questions for you for our viewers to see today. And we really wanted to just go ahead and dive right into them, if that's good with you.
All right, thanks a lot, John. Yeah, 2020 has definitely been a year to remember, even though we're only in the month of June, but hurricane season is here, and preparedness is really what we need to focus on. So I think what we're going to talk about today is really going to provide a lot of information to people listening, and I look forward to having the interview with you.
No, I appreciate it. And like we said, every year as a Floridian, we think about getting ready for hurricanes, making our plans, updating our hurricane kits, staying informed throughout the year. But we want to learn from you more of what we should be thinking about this year. So just diving in on the questions, the seasonal hurricane outlook was released last month. What can we expect from this hurricane season, and what does that outlook really what information from that outlook should our residents take into mind going into this season?
It's a good question to really think about each year. Typically during the months of April and May, that's really when here in Florida that we really want to start thinking about preparedness for hurricane season. And as we say at the National Weather Service, every month of the year is an opportunity to prepare for what hurricane season may bring to us. And in Florida, we have water on both sides of us, so we're pretty much surrounded by an opportunity of being impacted by a tropical storm or a hurricane. And so each year, NOAA will actually release what we call a hurricane outlook. And a lot of the times we'll say ignore the numbers because it only takes one storm to really deliver a significant impact to the area. However, we have been getting better at predicting how many storms may form. It doesn't really tell us how many storms are going to make landfall or that are going to hit Florida. But what we look at is we look at the entire Atlantic basin, so the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And we look at things like El Nino, La Nina. We look at how strong the jet stream or the fast river of air above our heads is blowing across Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. And we also look at something that's actually happening today is dust that blows off of the coast of Africa. We call it the Saharan Air Layer. And so there's a big plume of dust that blows off of Africa, and it actually reduces the chance of thunderstorms and hurricanes to develop during that short period of time. So right now, that's why we're seeing a really quiet Atlantic Ocean, because the dust is going to be blowing across the Atlantic and actually may reach us here in Florida next week. So be on the lookout for some great sunsets next week. But going back to the NOAA hurricane outlook, on average, every year we see anywhere from 12 named storms, that's tropical storms and hurricanes. 6 of those would become hurricanes, and 3 of those would become major. And what I mean by major is a category 3, 4, or 5. So we don't even want a category 1, but again, 12, 6, and 3 is the average. And so what NOAA is looking at this year is an above normal season. So we're forecasting an above normal year. And for the numbers, it's about 16 storms. And out of the 16, we're looking at 8 that could become hurricanes. And out of the 8 hurricanes, we're looking at about 4 that could become major. So again, it's above normal, but as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't really matter if we're forecasting a below normal season or an above normal season, because it only takes one. And a really good example for anyone listening, and I'm sure all of us remember 1992, it was a below normal year. It was much below normal year for all of 1992. But the season started in August with its first named storm, the letter A, and that storm was Andrew. Yep. And anyone across Florida, especially South Florida, remembers Hurricane Andrew. A lot of devastation from that Category 5 hurricane across South Florida. And so again, it was a below normal year, but that one hurricane changed the lives for many. So again, prepare now and prepare for an above normal season.
Yeah, I lived in South Florida actually during that time, and you're right. It only takes that one storm, and for Hurricane Andrew, that transformed Miami-Dade and people moving out of that area, and it forever changed the Homestead area. They never really, built back the same way it was before then, and for the last few seasons, those Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, and even last year with Hurricane Dorian coming that close, it really just takes that one storm to come to our area that's going to impact our residents, our lives, and maybe even forever change the way we actually live in our area. But no, definitely only takes one storm, and that's why those outlooks are great. To sort of see the activity level that's there, but only that one that's going to come to our area and affect us is really how we need to stay informed of what's going to be impacting us this year. And also, every year is our time to prepare, and we get that message out, through our Alert Tampa channels and through the City of Tampa social media pages. But what are the best ways for people to prepare in an active season? Do they need to change anything, seeing that seasonal outlook as a little bit more increase, or really just, back knowing that it only takes one storm to prepare, similar to every other year, or anything different?
Yeah, I agree. Every year should be the year that we basically anticipate that we're going to get the storm. We should consider every year that we're going to get, another Hurricane Irma, and that way we take it as serious. But what you said is important, and we want to make sure that we know now what would we do before, we start seeing that cone, that tropical storm or a hurricane, and Florida may be in its sight. So we want to develop a hurricane kit now. As we've seen, supplies have started returning to stores and availability. So again, 2020 definitely has a lot of challenges for all of us, even outside of hurricanes. And so we need to adapt. And so we really want to make sure that you go out there and you get enough water, enough of non-perishable food to really last you a good 5 days. And that the rule of thumb used to be 3 days, but as we've seen, climate change has really increased some of the heavy rainfall potential from tropical storms and hurricanes. And that can also increase the amount of time that someone may be without power. So you really want to prepare for a good 5 days to be on your own. So again, having cases of water, having medication, having food for you and your pets. And also, like I said, medications, you want to make sure that you get your supply that you may need for you and also your family. It could be neighbors, it could be elderly relatives that live near you. You want to make sure that you also have, supplies to really harden your home. You want to make sure that your home is ready. And that could really be something as simple as taking in patio furniture or making sure that your trees are trimmed, because if your trees, start getting blown apart by some of the strong tropical storm and hurricane wind, they become projectiles. If you have lawn furniture out in your back patio, that may very well end up in your living room if you don't have protection on your windows. So really know what you're going to do now before you start seeing hurricane watches and warnings. And another good point is really to know your zone. Okay, you want to know whether or not you live in an evacuation zone. Say, for example, I live in Riverview. I do not live in an evacuation zone. However, I have friends that live in Tampa, that live in West Chase, and that live in St. Petersburg. And so they do live in evacuation zones. So they're going to want to know where are they going to go when the city of Tampa or Hillsborough County or Pinellas County issue evacuation orders. So again, it's the partnership between the National Weather Service and you, John, and the Office of Emergency Management with the city of Tampa and surrounding Tampa Bay that allows that process to happen. But again, for everyone listening, if you hear that you're in an evacuation zone and an order is issued, you want to leave. And I want to make a point. I was talking to a good friend of mine, Andy Johnson, today. He's a meteorologist, a certified consulting meteorologist. And a lot of people know him from being on TV here in the Tampa Bay area. But Andy and I talked today, and we talked about, people that are vulnerable, that what do they do now, with the pandemic and the health crisis. And you really have to understand that you don't have to go far away to get out of the storm surge zone. During Hurricane Irma, it was the most people evacuated out of the state of Florida ever in history. And so you have to understand that sometimes there's a lot of chaos during hurricane evacuations, and there doesn't really need to be that much panic. Just get yourself out of where the storm surge area is. So again, we all have a phrase, run from the water and hide from the wind. So again, you may have a family or a friend that lives, farther inland. That's where you can go. Go into a well-built home away from the water, and that's going to be your safe place. You don't have to go to Atlanta. You don't have to go to Birmingham. You can go inland in the state of Florida and still be safe. And that way, the highways are not all clogged up from people that truly need to get out of the storm surge area.
I mean, the lessons learned from Hurricane Irma were so much. And, as emergency manager, I'm sure over at the Weather Service, you saw in the news the lines of the supplies, last minute supplies, and especially when those start running out, the added stress that adds to our residents, and pre-planning all this ahead of time and having those supply kits updated for this season alleviates a very stressful situation, regardless of a catastrophic hurricane coming to our area, by pre-planning ahead of time. And I've heard from Jared Moskowitz over at the State Division of Emergency Management. He keeps echoing, know your zone, but know your home as well. And he's been emphasizing, if you are in an up to code home, a strengthened home that's already been, retrofitted, maybe think about, if you're out of those evacuation zones, staying at home, and, not necessarily always thinking the shelter is the best place to go, because, often we try to message, it's not a cruise ship staying at a shelter during a storm. It's a lifeboat. It's there for our residents, if you have no place to go that's safe, that you need to evacuate to. But you can try to pre-plan ahead of time, that if you can stay at a friend's or family's house outside of an evacuation zone in an up to code home, that may be the best place to be at. And again, as we saw with Hurricane Irma, people trying to evacuate hundreds of miles away, and then ended up breaking down or not being able to get gas along the way, puts you more at risk than going 10 or 20 miles away outside of that surge zone. So, and again, the June 1st started for us here for the kickoff of hurricane season. But for us, is the Tampa Bay area, are we more at risk in June, or are there certain months of the season that we need to pay extra attention to? What sort of impact or, feedback can you give us on that for our residents?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the month of June, because here in Tampa and the west coast of Florida, June, and another month, I'll talk about that in a second, but June is actually one of our first peaks in the hurricane and tropical storm season, especially for the west coast of Florida. And a lot of us remember, June of 2012 with Tropical Storm Debbie, who delivered flooding rains across the area and a lot of tornadoes across west and southwest Florida. In fact, there was a woman killed in Highlands County by a tornado. She took safe shelter in her home and the tornado hit. And she was holding on to her baby, and they were both blown out of the house by the tornado. The baby survived because the mother, she protected the baby, but she lost her life. So again, tropical storms, it doesn't just have to be a hurricane. So a lot of people think that, oh, it's just a tropical storm. We still have to take necessary precautions and pretend it's a hurricane. So again, they can deliver tornadoes and a lot of storm surge. But also, June of 2013, we had Tropical Storm Andrea that hit Tampa. Again, another heavy rainfall, a lot of flooding across Tampa Bay and Pinellas and Pasco County. A lot of rainfall, a lot of flooding, a lot of people displaced from that. And also, we can go to Tropical Storm Colin, a handful of years ago in June. So again, I think you see the point there that we get a lot of tropical storms potentially in the month of June. And it's really because, throughout the winter, we get cold fronts and we like them, cooler weather, we can go outside, a lot of low humidity. But as we get to the month of June, the cold fronts, start having less cold air to really push them through the Tampa Bay area, and they stall over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And when you get a stalled cold front in the month of June, sometimes we get other conditions that come together. You get low pressure that forms, we get a tropical storm that develops. And honestly, that's really partially what happened so far this month. And even last month, so we had Tropical Storm Alberto, we had Tropical Storm Bertha, and now we had Tropical Storm Cristobal, a little over a week ago, that impacted the state of Florida. So June is actually an active month, and the other one is October. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that coming up. But again, the benchmarks of the hurricane season, June, it goes from June 1st to November 30th. But the west coast of Florida, June and October are actually months to really watch for those early season and the late season storms.
Yeah, no, and that was a record, right, for Cristobal to get to letter C already for a season. Is that a new record for us?
Not necessarily a record, but it's very above normal, kind of rare for us to see that we already have reached the third letter of the alphabet in the month of June. The next one will be Dolly. Whether or not it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, we'll still have to wait and see. But definitely the 2020 season has already started off very active.
Yeah. And you've talked about a bunch of different hazards that come from hurricanes and tropical storms. But just to reiterate to our viewers, in the city of Tampa or the Tampa Bay area, what are the major hazards of a storm or a tropical storm or hurricane that our residents need to really look at mitigating the risk of impact in their homes and looking out for their own selves?
Well, we talked about several from Tropical Storm Debbie in 2012 when we had a lot of tornadoes, we had a lot of flooding. But I'll take a kind of a scenario that a good friend of mine, Ken Graham, he's the director of the National Hurricane Center in Miami, which is part of the National Weather Service. And Ken Graham goes out and talks to a lot of emergency managers, and I know has come to this area. And he asks a lot of the folks in the audience to really, almost like close your eyes and what do you think of when you hear the word hurricane? And we can post that question out to the viewers right now. They can kind of put in the chat. What do you think of when we talk about hurricanes? And a lot of people tend to say wind. When they see the video, when they see the Weather Channel and the local media, out there, they want to get the footage of being blown around by the wind and the strong winds and things being blown apart. It's definitely very deadly, the wind, but typically water is really the main hazard from tropical storms and hurricanes. So again, storm surge is the #1 killer from tropical storms and hurricanes. And we think of, as we talked about earlier, if you live in an evacuation zone, that's your main threat. But inland flooding is another thing that we really have to worry about. So if you live near a river, so again, that's got to be a consideration because water can definitely enter your home if you live close to a river. So water is the #1 killer, whether or not you live along the coast from storm surge, or if you live farther inland from heavy rains that we see from tropical storms and hurricanes. And as we mentioned earlier, tornadoes can form from tropical storms and hurricanes. And that's where you really want to be, in an interior room, like a closet or a bathroom. You want to be away from windows. And so that's going to be the safest place to be from tornadoes.
And each storm has its own characteristics. I was thinking back of 2017, before Irma came to our area, but Hurricane Harvey, that was a heavy rainfall event that even had flooding inland. Is that right? That each of these storms can have sort of different hazards that propose a different sort of challenge to different communities?
It is, and you mentioned a good one with Hurricane Harvey across Southeast Texas, and that storm itself, did impacts in Corpus Christi, and it did memorable impacts across Houston because of the flooding and record flooding across that area. Well over 50 inches of rainfall that impacted, the greater Houston metro area. But in Corpus Christi's area, they had a lot of wind damage to the east of Corpus Christi, and tornadoes in the area, and several tornadoes in the Houston area. But it also represents a challenge because here, we're telling people to, get into an interior room like a closet or a bathroom on the lowest level of your home when it comes to tornadoes. But during Hurricane Harvey, we were also telling people to get on your roof because the flooding was already beyond the roof level of some homes. So again, we live in Hurricane Alley, if you will. And every part of the country has its own hazards, whether or not it's blizzards in the northern parts of the country, you have earthquakes out west, and you have tornadoes over the central part in the southeast US, and of course, hurricanes. So, it's great to live in the Sunshine State, other than when it's not, and we have hurricanes coming our way. So we want to make sure we can prepare as much as possible by having, the hurricane safety kits, knowing whether or not you live in an evacuation or a storm surge zone, and knowing where you would go if you do, and have supplies so you can better protect your life, because not every tropical storm or hurricane is going to be a Harvey or an Irma or a Maria or a Katrina or an Andrew. Those are the exceptions. And so we want to make sure that we know what to do before they come our way.
Yeah, and the storm surge for, the city of Tampa, that's a huge threat for us just because of, the way the coast and the bay is. But, that's what we base our evacuation zones off of, is storm surge modeling. But like you said, to get away from the water. And, from those storm surge models, we have our different levels, and our viewers can go to tampagov.net/hazard map and actually look up what zone they're in. They can type in their address to look at that information. So we try to make it easy going on an interactive map. But that storm surge, I remember during Hurricane Irma, I lived down in South Tampa at that time, and you saw the bay actually emptied out before the storm came. What was that about? And, the storm surge that potentially could have came from that storm. But I know I was driving down Bayshore and saw, the complete bay was emptied out and people were actually walking on it, which was just mind blowing to see.
Yeah, I remember being in the office that evening with a lot of us. Pretty much, like I said, we're 24/7 here, and so we had most of the team here at the National Weather Service in the office. We were sleeping here and working 12-hour shifts and rotating. And actually, one of our senior meteorologists, Jennifer Hubbard, her and I were looking at our social media, our Twitter, and also our Facebook, and we were seeing the pictures that Tampa Emergency Management and Tampa Bay Media Partners were putting out there, and seeing people actually walking out there in Tampa Bay. And so her and I were quickly forming a message to send out on Twitter and Facebook saying, okay, it may look interesting, but do not go out there and walk out there because the water can return pretty quickly. And so what we had was actually called negative surge. And so you think of storm surge as water rushing into the area as the hurricane or tropical storm pushes water, towards the coastline. Well, with Hurricane Irma, the original forecast, it was only off by about 50 miles. And so, and as we've seen it, that means, could mean life or death for an area with destruction. But the Hurricane Irma just went about 50 miles to the right of the track and made impact just south of Naples in Lee and Collier County down in Southwest Florida. And because the circulation around Irma was so large, it's a counterclockwise circulation. So think of a clock and it's counterclockwise. And so put Hurricane Irma down near Fort Myers and imagine counterclockwise circulation winds around it. So that was a northeast wind blowing across Tampa Bay. And so it was pushing the water out of Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. And so we lost about 6 or 7 feet of water out of Tampa Bay during that storm. And so people were going out there. There were manatees that were trapped. Yeah. We worked closely with Florida Fish and Wildlife and Mote Marine Laboratory and City of Tampa and Hillsborough County. And so folks were getting out there and, that knew what they were doing to save, the manatees and bring them farther out there. But definitely you do not want to walk out there. There's a lot of hazards that could be there. There's harmful algal blooms that we hear about. There's, broken glass and things like that. But again, definitely do not want to walk out in the bay when the water starts receding. Definitely a danger when that water starts coming back in.
No, definitely. And my experience back in 2018, I worked as a deployment up in the Panhandle after Hurricane Michael and saw Mexico Beach. And that's the storm surge damage that happened there. I mean, it's just devastating. And, that's why we keep reiterating, you have to get out of those zones. When we do an evacuation order for the city, it's for your life safety. And that's the reason why we're making that call, because of the damage that this storm surge can really impact on our city. It's devastating. And with Mexico Beach, I mean, it wiped away most of the beach. And you see, many people have seen some of the pictures, and you have that, the one mitigated home, that's still standing there. But, most of the coastline was completely devastated from that. And it's a strong threat that comes with these hurricanes. And, as we get into the later part of the season, in the months of October, November, can we let our guard down in Tampa Bay? And, we were alluding to that before, October being that, other sort of high peak for our area. But, what should we do as the season goes on? Do we need to change anything, for our residents or a mindset into October?
Yeah, you're right, John. Just like we talked about, with June being a hot spot for the early kickoff of the season for the west coast of Florida, October is another one, and for the same reason as before, but kind of reverse it. Remember we talked about, in the month of June, cold fronts come down to the area, they kind of lose their punch, they stall, and sometimes we'll get, tropical depression, tropical storm, sometimes a hurricane, forming. Same thing in October. So September is the peak of the whole Atlantic basin, hurricane season, mid-September, like around September 10 or so. Around that time we got Hurricane Irma. But in any case, October, now we're getting later in the season. Cold fronts are starting to come back down into the southeast United States. They start coming down into the Florida Panhandle, and they may start stalling out. And for the same reason, they stall out. They, the warm air over our central and south Florida is too great to allow that cold air to spill in. So it kind of stalls out, and we get tropical storms or hurricanes forming. But also what can happen in the month of October is hurricanes can form south of Cuba, and that's usually the prime spot that we start looking at, because climatologically, that's another hot spot that in the month of October where these storms form. And so if a cold front were to come down into Florida, stall out over the Panhandle, a hurricane starts moving northward, and it's going to go right over the Tampa Bay area because it can't go northward and cross that front. So October is also a time of year that we use because it's actually the signature storm for the Tampa Bay area. The last time that Tampa was directly hit by a major hurricane, again, category 3, 4, or 5, was back on October 25th, 1921. So again, hardly anyone is alive today that experienced that storm, but it was a category 3 hurricane that made landfall around Tarpon Springs, and it shoved the water into Tampa Bay and inundated pretty much all of downtown Tampa Bay and what is known as Davis Island right now. So again, October is that other time of year that we look at for the west coast of Florida, and we're not out of the woods. We can remember October of 2005 with Hurricane Wilma that hit South Florida. So again, Hurricane Wilma, a very powerful hurricane, formed down south of Cuba area and moved on northward and kind of made landfall over southwest Florida. So again, we definitely want to make sure that we remain vigilant throughout the hurricane season, because it really doesn't matter which month it is out of the hurricane season that can impact Florida.
No, definitely. You know, great information for everybody. Everyone, you know, if you've grown up in Florida, you know, you think that, you know, it's every year we got to get prepared for this. It have to take it seriously. The last few years have been very active. Hurricane Dorian, I was, you know, down in South Florida for that event as well. And, you know, these catastrophic storms seem to be, you know, more frequent the last few years. I know before Hurricane Irma, I think it was Hurricane Matthew, we sort of had that decade of a drought, and there was that hurricane amnesia. And, you know, some of even our residents, like you said, over 100 years, we haven't been hit. You know, are we lucky, or is our time due? Or is it just, you know, every year we just got to keep, you know, staying on guard, and it only takes one?
I think we really have to maintain that every single year is the chance that we may get hit by a hurricane. But you're right. I mean, back in 2005, we had about a decade where we were not seeing any hurricanes in Florida. In fact, it was a decade. So again, Wilma 2005, and then we saw, you know, 2015, where we started seeing, I believe, Hurricane Matthew, you know, off the east coast of Florida. That gave us all a scare, and you know, then it moved on to the north and you know, impacted parts of, you know, Jacksonville and southeast you know, U.S. But again, ever since 1995, we've been in this active period for the whole Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, and it usually goes a good 15 to 20, 25 years. There's no calendar cutoff for it, but it's pretty much a multi-decadal you know, fluctuation that we see across the Atlantic basin. And so we're still in that period. But as we saw, and we use the analogy of 1992, even if we were out of that active period, you know, we could have a season where we only see one storm. You know, it has not happened in our recorded history, observable since back in the 1950s and 60s. But if we had one season, you know, that we were fortunate enough to only have one storm, you know, what if it was another Harvey or another Irma and it came our way? So again, I think the main message is every year treat as if it's going to be the year that we see a tropical storm or a hurricane, and that we prepare accordingly.
Thanks, Brian. Is there anything else you want to give to our viewers on sort of a takeaway, you know, going back to, you know, back home after work today, or even, you know, just how they get prepared, just sort of a last sort of something maybe we didn't touch on?
I think we touched on a lot. I think a lot of the online resources, you mentioned some of the online resources for Alert Tampa and for the city of Tampa. Also, floridadisaster.org is another good website. So again, floridadisaster.org, you can go there, learn more about, you know, how the state of Florida is looking to do sheltering in our pandemic era, and also go to the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County websites and whatever county you're in, and really look up to know whether or not are you in an evacuation zone? Are you in a storm surge zone? We have also the weather.gov/Tampa is another resource that'll be from us here at the National Weather Service. So again, a lot of good resources out there. Also for people that have, you know, I think we all have cell phones. There's a lot of apps that you can get, a lot of free apps, you know, from the city of Tampa, also from FEMA. So again, if you're listening, you know, go to your app store and look at FEMA Weather App. So again, it's a free app, FEMA Weather App, and you can put in 5 counties, 5 cities in there, and you can get alerts when the National Weather Service issues warnings for your area. And it's information that'll really help you prepare and perhaps save your life when it comes to tornado warnings.
Hey, Brian, well, I appreciate it. Good seeing you again. I know it's been a while. Thank you for being with us. And just, you know, again, to reiterate to all our viewers, It only takes one storm to hit our area to impact you and your families. And really, now is the time to get prepared. I know we've been preparing for COVID-19 and many other things, for 2020, but really take the time and get prepared to making your plan, your family plan for your home, updating your disaster hurricane kit, and also, staying informed. And, to reiterate what Brian was saying, you can go to tampagov.net/hurricane for a ton of information that the city provides on preparing your families or your workplace for this upcoming hurricane season, as well as you can sign up to Alert Tampa to receive emergency notifications directly from the city. You can either go to tampagov.net/alert Tampa, or you just text the word Tampa Ready to 888-777. You will get those alerts directly to your cell phone. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Alert Tampa and to get real-time updates. Just want to thank everybody for viewing today. I think this is a really important information that we got out from Brian. And again, thank you for following us.